So yeah, as mentioned, I help Greg with the college course that we run. And so a lot of my job is kind of liaising between Greg and the students, but also trying to help make the material, bite-sized, approachable for an undergraduate audience. And so yesterday, we looked quite a bit through the Odyssey 1 through 4, but primarily focused on 5 through 8. I think that's about as large as I can get it, Greg.
That's perfect. Thank
Um,
you so much.
and I know a lot of what we were chatting about yesterday was about the format of lament
Yes.
in the Odyssey. And we were focused a lot on, we talk about lament a lot through the Iliad, which our college students have already read and worked through. But especially yesterday, we were getting into, I'm going to scroll down to the passages.
Perfect.
Here we are.
There we are.
So, Greg, you're going to have to say some of these Greek names for me because I am an Egyptologist.
Sure, but that's the beauty of our relationship in teaching a college course, dear Sarah and Hélène, which is that Arin is an Egyptologist. Lucky for me, she really likes the first millennium BCE. A lot of Egyptologists won't even talk to me because they do the earlier second millennium, and a lot of them do
Third,
even
third
earlier
millennium.
third, etc. So anyway, um, Arin and I have not only been teaching the kind of courses in college where let's say STEM students have to take something about literature
Mhm.
because it's good for you, but for some people, it's just castor oil. But we really want to get college students who may be very anxious about their careers, or let's just say their grades and all those things. We want to make college students um, feel more comfortable with dealing with the
Yeah,
very challenging um, verbal art,
yeah,
and 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 we don't shy away, Arin and I, from um, talking about very difficult things, very life-challenging things, because this medium, and I don't need to tell you two, dear Sarah and Hélène, um, we're dealing with a medium. Lately, I say that it took about 2,000 years for the oral tradition to develop to the kind of point that we see when we read what was eventually recorded in writing. So it's not just, shall we say, marveling at what one genius has done, or even many geniuses over many years. It's a archaeology of community over millennia, and
yeah.
that's how good it is. And so, Arin, maybe you could talk a little bit about how college students, especially, who are very career um, worried, how they what their first impression of something like the Iliad is. Oh, it's just shoot 'em up, and that's why lament is so important for both Aaron and me.
Yes. Yeah, lament comes in quite a bit because, as Greg mentioned, we do have a lot of career-oriented students, and a lot of the students that we teach are STEM focused, but they have to take it's a liberal arts college, and so they have to take a class in various categories. And we do have quite a few students who are taking our class just for fun. They've fulfilled their requirements, they've heard good things, they want to take something different. We do have quite a few of those students as well. We do have students that are interested in this topic, but the majority of our students, I would guess, are STEM focused, just trying to get the credit out of the way. And so they come in with these preconceptions, right? They don't know a lot about Greek mythology, or what they do know is Disney, Rick Riordan, those types of things. Very pop culture,
Yeah,
sanitized. And so the very first thing that we have them do in the first like 2, 3 weeks of the course is they read the entire Iliad. And it's fast and it's difficult. And what happens is afterwards we have conversations with them of, was it what you expected? And the answer is almost always no. They vaguely know it's a war story, but they expect the emphasis to be all of Achilles' great feats, and they expect him to feature very heavily throughout the story. They expect him to be doing a lot of the fighting because that's what they know about Achilles. They expect to see the Trojan horse because, of course, it's the story of the Trojan War. They don't expect the emphasis on comrades. They don't expect the emphasis on brotherhood and family and all of the connections that are made between the people in the Iliad. And so when they come out of it, oh, and the final thing that they expect is they expect Achilles to die. They expect to see the end of Achilles because it's his story. And so they come in with all of these preconceptions, and Greg and I have to hold their hand through it and they get it by the end, but one of the things that we heavily focus on is lament. And we take them through this whole journey throughout the whole semester about lament. And we always tell them, you're never going to get away from the Iliad. We're always going to wind up coming back to the laments featured in the Iliad, especially the laments of Andromache over Hector. And by the end of the semester, they get it. By the end of the semester, things have clicked into place. But especially where we're at right now in the semester, they're only just starting to lock in. We've only just hit this passage in the Odyssey where we see Odysseus crying over the exploits that happened in the Trojan War, as sung by, Greg, say this name, Demodocus?
Demodicus, perfect. Couldn't be better.
Perfect. So, as Demodocus is singing in the Odyssey, the exploits that Odysseus went through, and he's crying. And we keep bringing up lament for these students as an anchor point to get them through the Iliad, which is so difficult, especially for us in a modern concept where most of us aren't familiar with war. Most of us haven't gone through these battles or have been familiar with it in the way that the ancient Greeks would have been. And so we use lament as an anchor to hold them through the whole semester. And that's really sort of the secret of the class is the class frames, how did the ancient Greeks use heroes to deal with death? But it's sort of secretly labeled lament in ancient Greece.
Yes. That's beautiful. And Arin, you might mention how frustrated both you and I are that some of the greatest hits of ancient Greek epic, um, beyond the Homeric Iliad, beyond the Homeric Odyssey, have not survived except in plot outlines. And even though you're very young, Arin, you know the expression cliff notes. But I bet even younger people don't even know what cliff notes are.
No, so a lot of our students, they were sort of phasing out even when I was in undergrad, which was, oh gosh, I'm not gonna say. Not terribly long ago, but long enough ago. But even then, they were starting to phase out Spark Notes and Cliff Notes. I think in my head, I had that Cliff Notes are a little bit older, and then Spark Notes came in, tried to make them more approachable. I might have that backwards. But yeah, the students aren't as familiar with these sort of summaries, these reading guides, um, that were there for a while. But yes, this is something that we have to help our students understand, is especially we were reading through the summary of the Iliupersis by
Yes.
Proclus, and having to explain to our students what this is. This came up with my group of students yesterday of we were having to explain that this is not the Iliad, this is not the Odyssey, this is a third thing that explains some of the gaps effectively between the two narratives. And this is how we know about the Trojan horse. Because as I've noticed, it's not in the Iliad. And we've jumped ahead in the Odyssey, and they're like, well, how do we know about this? And so we have to use these little, as
Yeah.
Greg calls them, cliff notes, these summaries, these plot summaries to help us fill in these gaps. And one thing that my students always get stuck on is, but which came first? And one of the larger struggles we have with the students is the fact that this was an oral tradition. These would have been happening simultaneously. They would have been in dialogue with each other, and only later were they actually written down. But we are so used to a written format, we are so accustomed to things being fossilized. That's always very difficult for the students to understand. They were asking me yesterday about different versions, and oh, but I read this version that said that this happened. And I had to tell them, Both are true. And it's so hard for them to wrap their brain around. And so getting them in the habit of looking at these summaries, understanding that these stories can simultaneously be true but contradict each other, and that we only have what survived the historical record. There might be other things that existed at the time that we just don't have.
And what you just said, dear Aaron, brings me to something that I haven't yet shared with you. So I'm sharing now with our wonderful group here, which is there's one particular student who both comes to the lectures that Aaron and I do together, but who also is assigned to a section which only Aaron does, where Aaron can work with a smaller group. So this student, student X, is very bright, very inquiring. I love his curiosity. Comes up to me after the lecture that you and I gave yesterday, and he says, "Now wait a minute." And I'm going to do a spoiler alert. Is that okay with you, Sarah and Hélène? Which is, let's face it, even in the Iliad, Andromache in Iliad 6 is already predicting, uh, or shall we say, foreseeing that her son, the son she had with Hector, um, is going to die. Um, she doesn't talk about who will be the killer, but let's just say it's already a foregone conclusion that the infant will die. And that's one of the reasons it's such a moving scene when Hector and Andromache have their final farewell in Iliad 6. So let's say that's already a given, all right, that the baby will die sometime in the future. And and you know what? I'm going to honor not spoiling this for anybody out there in Heroes X who doesn't know yet how the child dies. But I'm saying that's what Aaron and I were exploring and kind of surprising people. And but let me preview one thing which Aaron doesn't know is this student came up to me and said, "But wait a minute, um, I've seen vase paintings where the child is killed not by the hero that you were talking about, but by another hero." And that's exactly what Aaron is talking about when people see contradictions and they'll say, "What's going on?" And then Aaron and I have to explain, well, this is a medium that is meant to be the truth value for a lot of localities that may be rivals with each other, et cetera, et cetera. And since myth is a way of a traditional uh, song culture to tell cosmic truths to a local population. The trouble is that one locale's truth value will be different from another locale's truth value. And it's not that Aaron and I are squishy and say, oh, they're all true, not that way, but because they're true to each community separately. And then, sure, there are media that are, so to speak, developed in such a way as to shade over the differences and highlight the similarities. And that's what Homeric poetry does most of the time. Whereas the poetry of the cycle, the so-called epic cycle, has a lot more mutually contradictory variants. And so, Aaron, just for the fun of it, can you take us through this particular um, alternative epic,
Mhm.
which we don't have in its entirety. We only have a plot outline from a fairly good era. So it's old enough of a plot outline, but I'm saying it's still a plot outline. This isn't poetry. This is a prose plot outline. But can you walk us through, dear Aaron, about what this is about? And Demodocus is the blind singer. Ooh, ooh, wait a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. I almost spoiled it. So let me be quiet and over to you, Aaron.
So it's actually very funny because I knew student X was speaking with you after class yesterday, and he raised the exact same question in our small group discussion, and I
Oh,
gave him the same answer.
Ah, so at least Aaron and I gave the same answer.
But this is what I'm saying. It's so hard for them to understand how some of these fit together.
I love it. I love
Um,
it.
so yes, this is what's called the Little Iliad, the Iliupersis by Arctinus of Miletus. And it's the summary. This is where you really get the story of the Trojan horse that a lot of people find is missing from the Iliad. They know it, they've seen it in pop culture. And so this is our little, just very quick summary of what happened. So the Trojans were very suspicious of the horse and what to do with it. Some thought it should be pushed off a cliff, others thought they should simply burn it, and a third group said they should dedicate it to Athena because this was her area.
Yeah.
And in the end, this is the group that wins. So they dedicate the horse to Athena, and make it sacred. And they start having a feast and they have a party and they're being freed from war and everything's dandy. And then a portent appears, two serpents, and destroy Lacon
Yep. Yep.
and one of his sons. And at this site, the Aeneas and his followers get up and they go to Mount Ida. This was the portent that they were waiting for. This is the signal. And Sinon lights signal fires for the Achaeans. Everything has been prearranged, and they storm out. You know, some of them are sailing from the Tenedos towards Troy, others are coming out of the Horse and are just able to completely ransack the city. They kill a lot of people. Neoptolemus kills Priam, who had taken refuge at the altar of Zeus Hercaeus. Chaos ensues. Menelaus finds Helen and is able to take her back to the ships. And we have more killing. There's a list of just all these killings and draggings. And at the site of Cassandra being
Yes.
taken, the Achaeans get very angry. They stone Ajax. He's
Well,
taken
no, they
refuge.
tried to stone him.
Try to stone him, excuse me, yes.
Ah,
They decide to stone him. They try.
yeah.
He takes refuge at Athena. It's just all of this
Oh,
craziness.
awful stuff. Yeah.
Awful, awful. They burn the city. They slaughter Polyxena on the tomb of Achilles. Odysseus, here it is, kills
Here it is.
Astyanax.
Whoa, stop. Stop right there. Wait a minute. Um, and 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 so in this epic, Odysseus is committing what could fairly be called a war crime.
Yeah,
He's killing the child of Hector and Andromache. And we know from other sources, it's even worse that he takes the infant to the highest point of the walls of Troy and throws the infant to his death. Wow. Okay.
yeah,
And and so this is where the student comes up to me after our joint lecture where Aaron and I are talking about this passage and says, but wait a minute, there's a vase painting where it's Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, who kills the baby, and it's not Odysseus. And right, but in this particular epic tradition, which is the Iliou-Persis, the destruction of Troy. And by the way, dear Aaron, I hate to break this to you, but there are two micro-Iliads at least, and actually more. So uh, folks often call the other one Little Iliad. They call this one Iliou-Persis because that other name has been taken, but
yeah,
it's two different versions. It's very different, mutually contradictory versions of the end of Troy. But so you're right to call it Little Iliad, but a classicist would say, wait a minute, that is called the Ilias Mikra, and this is the Iliou Persis. But same deal. It's still a micro Iliad. It's only 4 scrolls, Aaron.
yeah.
And how many scrolls? Well, we all know how many scrolls for the Iliad. It's 24 scrolls. So if I divide 4 into 24, I guess this micro epic for which we only have a plot outline is help me with my math. So it's 1/6 the size of
Yep.
our Iliad, which is 15,000 verses. So, people will try to guess how the Iliou Persis, how big that was, but obviously the scroll size tells you a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry for that interruption. Do go on, dear Erin.
I think Claudia actually has something to add for
Oh,
us.
please, dear Claudia.
Well, it's not, I'm not adding to that. I have a question actually. So, we're talking about these kind of different variants about what could have happened, different versions. And so I'm just kind of wondering, last time we were talking a lot about this word antagonism,
Yeah.
and Greg, you had just mentioned that there were all different thoughts about by different localities about what would have happened. So they might have a different version. So do you feel like for people there was a sense of our version is the right version, that version is the wrong version, or
Oh,
do
yeah.
all those versions live simultaneously? Like Neoptolemus is the killer, and Odysseus is the killer, and whoever else also killed Astyanax is
Well,
also the killer.
no, but for them, it's not squishy the way it can be if students say, "Well, how do you account for it?" And we have to say, "Well, different people, different societies have different truth values, and myth is a way of telling truth values. It's not, Erin and I, we've been back and forth on this. I'm allergic to the word fiction because fiction implies that something is not true. Well, yeah, um, what's a cosmic truth to one community, and you cross the mountain and go to the next valley, may be a fiction for that because they say that's a lie. And the Odyssey is
Mhm,
full of situations where Odysseus, because he's such a shapeshifter, he can negotiate between one tradition and another tradition and make it all sound the same, or make it sound squishy. But it's
mhm,
not
mhm.
squishy at all. It's dead serious. Myth is cosmic truth for the locale. But that's why,
Gotcha.
sure, Claudia, you and I don't have to believe any of this. In fact, we don't because we're trying to be empirical. We're trying to be scientific about myth. But part of the science of studying myth is understanding that the people that it worked for did think it was cosmic truth. The trouble is, sometimes they didn't even know about the other version because
Mhm,
all they grew up with was one particular version where, let's say, it was the son of Achilles, Neoptolemus, who killed the child of Hector and Andromache, whereas in other versions, it's Odysseus. And in still other
mhm,
versions, it may be somebody else.
mhm. Okay. So I hear that. Also, I'm wondering, like, so within a community, though, could there be different versions? It's not that I'm not saying it's truth. I'm saying I think our sense of that is a problem, that there are different versions, is our problem. I just don't know that it's their problem. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, it's not their problem. What they will
Right.
say,
That's exactly.
or let's say there are different days because um, so for example, in this project that I did so many years ago, maybe oh my goodness, over 40 years ago, what I try to say is that uh, as communities get more and more interconnected, and a good example is medieval Irish society. What happens is if there are special privileges given to, for example, artisans who are masters of verbal art, that is to say, poetry. And in the case
Mm,
of medieval Irish law, we know that people who did the equivalent of what is epic in Homeric poetry, um, they would be juridically immune when they move from one petty kingdom to another. But that means that
mm,
if you have to please different communities that have different truth values, you really learn the hard way, don't you, that you've got to shade over the differences and try to highlight the similarities. And my term for that in the book Best of the Achaeans is Pan-Hellenism. And
mhm,
don't get me wrong, Pan-Hellenism, it sounds like, well, something that's good for all Hellenes. That sounds absolute. These things don't get to be absolute, but let's say relative Pan-Hellenism is certainly the Iliad and the Odyssey. The reason they survived and let's say the Iliad did not survive. I mean, there are many reasons, but one of them is that the Iliad and the Odyssey are the most pan-Hellenic, are the most, shall we say, approved for general audiences. But
Mhm.
I wouldn't go to what you're trying to get me to say, and I'm not going to say it, ha ha ha, because I know we love to play games, Claudia and I, about how far you can go with an argument. Let me put it this way. In oral poetry, an audience has to be on your side. Or
Mhm.
maybe to say it better, when you're performing as an oral poet to an audience, you better do it their way. Otherwise, they won't accept it.
Mhm.
You see
Mhm.
what I'm saying?
Well, that's part of it. Yeah.
So, we don't have a situation where, only 20% of a given audience accept something. If you don't accept it, that means you're not part of the community.
Mhm. Mhm. Beautiful.
So it's all a negotiation. And sometimes, this is the weirdest part, is sometimes different versions of myths can be accepted by deadly enemies. Uh,
Mm.
and I call that contractual, where um, there's some things that are just irreconcilable, but one community of enemies knows that another community of enemies has a very different take. And and I hope that this particular group of us gets to meet again when we do in Heroes X, um, Oedipus at Colonus, because there Oedipus dies one way in Athens and dies another way in Thebes, but the two communities know very well the two variants, and they still hate each other. They have wars with each other, but they're aware that different communities have different versions. So
Mhm.
so one community will say, well, that's a lie to the other community, but then you need something like a pan-Hellenic force that can shade things over, as I say, or may I put it this way, smooth things over. But it's not we, the researchers who are studying all of this empirically. It's not that we're squishy, we're not.
Yes. God. And the poets are not just making stuff up.
Oh, there's no such thing as making stuff
Right.
up. Um,
Exactly.
that's sort of San Francisco in the second half of the 20th century, where
Can I ask a
improvise.
little bit about the narratives that occur within the whole body of the Odyssey,
Yes.
where Menelaus and Demodocus and I've forgotten the name of the singer at the beginning.
Oh, Phemius, yes, Phemius,
Yeah,
yeah.
and they're all singing versions of the returns, versions of the Trojan War.
Yeah,
Are these could these be versions that are kind of almost incorporated,
yes.
or local versions, or are they always part of the Odyssey itself, as it were?
Well, what you just said, dear Sarah, is, and notice that our Aaron immediately took us to our 9 text G, because this singer in Odyssey 8, Demodocus, actually means he who is approved by the local community. So we're talking here about a local poet who has a local version, or should I say localized? It could be regional. It doesn't have to be one valley, as I said earlier. It could be a whole region that happens to be speaking the same dialect, for example, whatever. But I'm saying there's just a lot of diversity. And and so what Erin and I were doing yesterday in this big class is is we took the plot outline that you just saw, which is just a prose plot outline attributed to somebody we don't know anything more about, called Proclus. And there it was, shall we say, the epic of the Trojan horse, let's call it that way, just for our purposes. And it took it took the equivalent of 4 papyrus scrolls to write it down versus 24 papyrus scrolls. I was telling the group, dear Claudia, earlier, 24
Mm.
versus 4. So this other epic was 6 times shorter. But the weird thing is, and I can't get over it. And I was telling, remember, Aaron, I was telling the students is I still can't get over something that just hit me between the eyes 50 years ago, that in Odyssey 8, this local poet, or somebody, Sarah, who's represented as a local poet, this local poet is telling the Trojan horse story in almost exactly the same way that we just heard from that plot outline. But this time, this epic, Sarah, is embedded inside the Odyssey. It's in Odyssey 8. And as Aaron knows, it took me such self-discipline not to talk about this until, in the case of this particular classroom and the momentum and what we were covering, I could only get to it yesterday, just the other day, as people say. So, Aaron, would you mind taking us through what the Odyssey says in the form of an embedded plot outline? Could I say it? But this is not a prose plot outline. This is the retelling of the Trojan horse story. And Sarah, you're implying, is this local? Yeah, I would answer yes, I think it is. It's more local. It's not necessarily pan-Hellenic, but you can get away with that when you embed a story in a story when it comes to Homeric poetry. But I'm jumping ahead. Aaron, do you want to walk us through this?
Sure. So Odysseus is a stranger in this household. They've taken him as a guest, and Demodocus is entertaining these people. He's already gone through two other rifts, and Odysseus, they don't know he's Odysseus, asks Demodocus, "Can you tell the story of the Trojan War?" And this is where we pick up here. So Demodocus picks up, and he picks up where the Achaeans are boarding their ships and sailed away, setting their tents on fire. And this is what some of them were doing, but others were with Odysseus, and they were hidden inside the horse, which was already with the Trojans. The Trojans themselves had pulled the horse into the Acropolis, so it was standing there, and they talked a great deal about it, in doubt about what to do, sitting around it. There were three different plans: to split the hollow wood with pitiless bronze, or to drag it to the heights and push it down from the rocks, or to leave it, great artifact that it was, a charm of the gods, which I now see it was exactly the way it was going to end, because it was fate that the place would be destroyed once the city had enfolded in itself the great wooden horse, when all the best men were sitting inside it, the Argives, that is the Achaeans,
Wow.
bringing slaughter and destruction upon the Trojans.
And
It is
Aaron,
almost the same wording as
yes,
what we saw
yes.
earlier.
And it's like you think that this was copied from that plot outline, but that plot outline is a very late, you know, Cliff Notes prose plot outline from something we don't even have anymore. Whereas this is part of the oral traditional poetry that finally got written down, and this is the poetry. And it's almost like one thing was copied from another thing, but it's just a matter of, shall we say, related oral traditions with variations.
Yeah.
Wow. But keep going. So then what happens here? Do we actually get to see Odysseus killing the child of Hector and Andromache? No, just where you're supposed to hear it. And I was saying to the class, and I think I really failed. I started talking about Freud's theory of Nachträglichkeit, which means in Freud's fancy German, not only um, supplement, where you substitute instead of you go A, B, C, D, E, and when you get to D, you substitute something else for D because you're blocking the memory of something traumatic. Okay, that's so Nachträglichkeit can mean substitution, but it can also mean regret, sorrow, resentment. Resentment in the sense is I'm so despairing of myself. How could I ever do such a thing? And so when you remember something, but wait a minute. So we don't have just where you're expecting how, well, gee, if this impartial oral poet is saying that all this slaughter was happening just at the point where you expect the poet, Demodocus in this case, to say, oh, and then Odysseus killed Astyanax. What happens, Arin?
Yeah, so we come through this description of what's been happening, and we get to this part here. So these were the things that the singer most famed was singing. As for Odysseus, he dissolved into tears. And we get this description of Odysseus crying as a woman, and we wind up describing this woman just as a woman cries, falling down and embracing her dear husband who fell in front of the city and people he was defending, trying to ward off the pitiless day of doom that is hanging over the city and its children. She sees him dying, grasping for his last breath, and she pours herself all over him as she wails with a piercing cry. But there are men behind her, prodding her with their spears, hurting her back and shoulders, and they bring for her a life of bondage, which will give her pain and sorrow. Her cheeks are wasting away with sorrow that is most pitiful. So also did Odysseus pour out a piteous tear from beneath his brows. And it goes on. But what we see here is Odysseus cannot handle the memory of what he did, and he breaks down. But rather than describe it just like that, we get this substitution of a description of a woman. Her husband's come back. He's just been struck down. She's sobbing over his body. She's being pierced with spears. She knows she's going to be taken away into bondage. And we're substituting that visual for Odysseus and how he is feeling about what he's done in the war. So we have this sort of simile that is happening here.
Yeah.
And it turns out that Alkinoos was the only one who was aware. He's the only one that notices what's been happening here. And he sees Odysseus, to use it colloquially, bawling his eyes out
Yeah.
over what he's done.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Wow. So you can see, especially dear Sarah and Hélène, but also Claudia, who's been in on this kind of experience with Greg before, you can see how, the excitement for somebody like me after 50 years, it just doesn't leave me that you have this kind of empathy. It's the wrong word. It's better the way Arin said it, is what's actually happening, is in a sense the man who has regrets about his past gets to feel what his victims had felt. And Arin and I were doing this riff about this kind of interpretation, and Arin already knew there was a row of as many as 5 veterans or four veterans in a group of 7 who are comrades, and so they always sit in the same row. And so Arin and I weren't being high horses. Oh, warriors commit war crimes. Everybody knows that horrible things can happen and that war is horrible. But the whole point is that what brings us all together is the feeling of sorrow about suffering, sorrow especially about the suffering of people who weren't asking for anything. It just happened to them. And well, I run out of breath. It's still overwhelming to me how
So
beautiful this is.
I was speaking with one of these students, we'll call him student Z, about this before class, which is what sparked me to encourage these
Yeah,
veterans to speak with us about it. And as he was reading this passage, he identified symptoms of PTSD
yeah,
effectively. And he noted, he said they wouldn't have had that term, they wouldn't have used that modernism, but they recognize the effects of war and how this can affect people, and they're describing it. And he said, he understood what Homer, or the author, however, master narrator, however you want
yeah,
to phrase it,
yeah,
was getting at here, and the feelings that Odysseus was showing as an after effect of war. And student Z was telling me he and his buddies all identified with that to various degrees,
yeah,
being veterans and understanding where this came from. And he said it really endeared him to Odysseus and it endeared him more to Greek mythology that this has been a thing. It's
Wow.
not just now, it's constant.
Yeah.
And that it helps him understand the Iliad better, it helps him understand Odysseus
Yeah.
better, and the complicated relationship that our students honestly have with Odysseus, especially when they get through this passage and see what he did. But we're supposed to like him. And student Z was saying, I get it.
Wow.
Mhm.
And then something else, and I'd love to hear Sarah's and Hélène's reactions because you've had so much experience talking with people from all walks of life in the context of Heroes X, and also Claudia, with whom uh, I've worked a lot on this passage. And if we have time, I would love to see how this passage, may I say it this way, resonates with later poetry. And do you mind, Claudia, if I just mention for a second that, you have a larger version of, let's say, the Trojan horse narrative. You have a more compressed version. And then what about reception that is beyond Greek civilization, and that is Roman civilization? And so I made the point, for example, when Arin and I were doing what we call lecture, but it's really a dialogue. So Arin and I in our dialogue were pointing out, well, Virgil, the great Roman poet of epic, first century BCE, when he does Iliad 1 and Iliad 2 especially, there's all of this, shall we say, remembering of Troy and the suffering, but he had access, Virgil had access to the Iliou Persis. He had access to the Little Iliad. He had access to all these other epics, which we have now lost and which we now have only on plot outline. And so who's controlling? So, Arin, if you could go down to what Virgil says about this kind of thing. Yeah, there it is. And it's in Latin, it goes, this is in Aeneid 1, and Aeneas, who is a refugee from Troy and who's now made it all the way to Italy. And no, I'm sorry, right, he's not there yet. He's made his way to Carthage, and he's looking at relief sculpture in Carthage of a beautiful temple where the sufferings of the Trojans at Troy are represented. And he sees Priam. And can you scroll back where we see a vase painting of Priam weeping? I just love that. And so when he sees the sufferings of Priam, who is lamenting the death of his son, and this is in Virgil's Aeneid. Let me repeat, this is Roman epic. Aeneas says, and I'll translate first, there are tears that connect with the real things of the universe, and things that happen to mortals touch the mind. Well, that's just Greg's very literal-minded translation. What I wanted to make it clear is that the Roman poet is referring to earlier Roman poetry where the poetry is talking about a universe full of atoms. They already knew atom theory. And so this statement is saying that in every atom of the universe, there is a story, a micro story of lament, of somebody crying. And when I say lament, of course, it's always, crying while you sing, singing while you cry. And and then, so oh, by the way, in Latin, let's see if I can still do this. Sunt lacrimae reret mentem mortalia tangunt. And, so it's if I just separate it, sunt lacrimae rerum, there are tears, and the genitive I translate as a genitive of connection, in connection with the whole universe. And now if you scroll further down, I think further down, so then we talk about all the tears, and here's a picture further down of women lamenting just the way in ancient vase paintings, women are lamenting with this gesture that I'm reproducing here. Okay, keep going. And how the French talk about not only the beautiful death, but the beautiful corpse, because isn't it nice that Hector's corpse never gets to be skinned, which is what Achilles in his brutality is trying to do, is skin the corpse so that the corpse is not beautiful. But the Greeks have this thing about the beautiful death and the beautiful corpse, and Hector's corpse remains beautiful. And there's that wonderful painting by David, pre-revolutionary David. So he's still a royalist at this point, but never mind that. Okay, keep going. And then here's this Christian rethinking of all of this, where it's the mother of Jesus who is lamenting le beau mort, the beautiful corpse. And it's fairly erotic because Michelangelo makes Mary look the same age as Jesus here. So it's almost as if they were lovers, which is sacrilegious to say in a Christian context, but it's perfectly okay to say in pre-Christian context. Okay, and then what Arin and I were showing yesterday was this picture was taken in the mid 1930s, and what we see here is a demonstration where a demonstrator has been shot to death by the regime in this case, and the demonstrator's young mother, a young widow, is lamenting over the corpse of the demonstrator. And the great poet Ritsos saw a picture of this in the newspaper in the mid 30s, and he did this amazing song, which poor Arin, we had the poem which was set to music. We played it for the class. I hope they liked it. I don't know. I couldn't tell. Did the kids like it?
I think they like it. They find it intriguing.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the lamenting at the end of the Iliad, because the end of the Iliad ends with the funeral of Hector, the Trojan, and the three laments at the end of the Rhapsody, 24 hours. Beautiful. Yeah.
Well, tell me, is the recording still going on?
It's still going. Yes, let's
good.
do it. Let's roll. Yeah, that's great.
Excellent.
I'm trying not to put people on the spot. Okay, so that's all. The only reason I'm not calling people. I know you have beautiful things to share.
And Sarah, do you want to say any last word?
Well, all the beautiful hair was
pressure.
making me think about Achilles and his cutting off the hair. It was going to be an offering to the river back home, and then it was an offering to Patroclus. And I wondered if the hair was connected in any way, just a random thought.
Oh, I'm sure. And not only is it connected, but as this sounds like I've written about everything. I haven't written about so many things, but it turns out that in terms of the Iliad, when Achilles cuts off his hair to mourn Patroclus, that's why, according to later sources, Achaeans are no longer long-haired. The Greek men don't wear long hair. And who's the exception? The Spartans, of course, because, they're so exceptional. So Spartan warriors have long hair. And that's why in Herodotus, when the Persian king of kings sends spies at Thermopylae to see what are 300 Spartans doing on the last day they're alive. So the spy goes, and you know what they're doing? They're grooming their long hair to have the perfect hair day on their death.
And their poetic tradition also talks about the beautiful corpse as well, doesn't it?
Yes. Oh God. Yes. Yes. So the Spartans are such exceptionalists. Hey, we're exempt. We still have long hair, right until death. But Athenians and all other Greeks, they have short hair because they're trying to they're replicating how Achilles cut his hair um, in what is our Iliad. Wow.
So cool. So cool.
And as wonderful Claudia knows, in Masterpieces of Metonymy, I start with that very iffy film, but it has very good moments by Milos Forman called Hair. And the original production has, of course, a death of a young man who gets carted off to Vietnam. So the whole book, Masterpieces of Metonymy, is all about hair.
Oh, beautiful, Greg. Thank you so much for helping us think about that. And Arin, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we really value all your expertise that you are bringing to the project. So,
Wow.
and Helen and Sarah, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your participation. So I think that's all for this week. Until next week.